Welcome back to the Creating a Community Animal Disaster Plan Toolkit. Let's move on to Step 6. Write, review, formalize a plan and annex. In Steps 1 through 4, we discuss the foundational work needed to create an animal disaster plan for your community. In Step 5, we briefly stepped away from the planning process to discuss how to build a cart that will enable you to implement your plan once it's written. In this webinar, we'll move back to the process of creating your written plan or annex. By this point in your work of creating an animal disaster plan, you have created a collaborative community planning team, identified the risks and hazard in your community, determined your community's needs, and conducted a gap analysis, and begun the all-important work of creating a cart. Now is the time to begin writing, reviewing, and formalizing your plan. What should your plan or annex cover? The major points of your plan should address preparedness, evacuation support, shelter operations, registration and animal intake, animal care, and public information and outreach. As we touch on each of these areas, I'll be discussing action items and questions that are derived from a FEMA document entitled FEMA CPG 101 Supplement, Household Pets and Service Animals. This is a document that was printed on June 24th of 2010 and is the most recent document at this point. This supplement can be found on the internet with a Google search, and I highly recommend that you obtain a copy of it and use it as a guide in working through the development of your plan or annex. I do want to say up front, however, that the questions posed in the FEMA document are lengthy and detailed, and they may seem a little daunting as we walk through some of them in the next few minutes. But I'd ask you to realize in advance that they are questions to guide you in your thinking. Not all of these questions need to be addressed in your initial planning. Address the basics in your initial plan and utilize these more detailed questions in future updates to your plan as you see necessary. Don't be put off if you can't address many of these questions in your initial planning effort. Remember, it's more important to have a plan than to have a large plan. Let's start with preparedness. Your plan should describe the partnership between your jurisdiction's emergency management agency, the animal control authority, the human mass care providers, and the owner of each proposed household pet sheltering facility. Your plan should have a formal agreement of some kind that defines the roles and responsibilities of each of those organizations as they are involved in household pet and service animal response. Your plan should also discuss what evacuation support will look like. Does your plan address the evacuation and transportation of household pets from their homes or by their owners, or those household pets rescued by responders and taken to emergency animal shelters? Does your plan address how owners will be informed where they can find emergency animal shelters? Does the plan identify who will transport household pets or service animals for those owners who are dependent on public transportation? Does your plan address how household pets that are provided with evacuation assistance become registered, documented, tracked, and reunited with their owners if they are separated during the evacuation? And does your plan address the responsibility of evacuation transportation providers to transport both people and their pets during a disaster? Your plan should also discuss in detail how emergency animal sheltering operations will be conducted. Does your plan identify the agency responsible for coordinating and managing shelter operations? Is it animal control, the local humane society, or the CART? Does the plan provide guidance to human shelter operators on the admission and treatment of service animals? Remember, service animals are legally not pets. Service animals must be sheltered with their owners and not in the emergency animal shelter. But many human sheltering agencies are not prepared to properly shelter an animal along with their human owner, and may need assistance and support to be able to do that. This may be an area you'll want to address in your plan, and work with your human shelter providers to detail out in advance how your process will work. Does the plan establish criteria that can be used to expeditiously identify household pet shelters and alternate facilities? Many communities have a primary emergency animal shelter identified. But what if that facility is not available? Or what if it's affected by the disaster itself? Do you have a way to quickly identify an adequate alternative location for your animal shelter? That identification of an alternative shelter may require guidance about utility provisions, such as running water, adequate lighting, proper ventilation, electricity, and backup power. Does the plan include mechanisms or processes to reduce or even eliminate the risk of injury by an aggressive or frightened animal, the possibility of disease transmission, and other health risks for responders and volunteers staffing the emergency animal shelter? Your plan might also want to identify areas that are specific to the facility itself in terms of inspection, care, maintenance, and necessary supplies. Does the plan provide for security at the emergency animal shelter? You may find, unfortunately, that people do steal animals from shelters during disasters. And you may also have volunteers who work overnight shifts at the shelter. In both of these cases, considerations may be needed for additional security at your local animal shelter. Does the plan provide for acceptance of donated resources? Often managing those donations is a larger job than obtaining them in the first place. Does the plan provide for the acquisition, storage, and security of food and water supplies? Does the plan provide for the diverse dietary needs of household pets? Let's move on to some questions about registration and intake. Remember, the ultimate goal in caring for animals during disaster is to be able to return them safe and sound to their owners. Proper registration and animal intake assures that goal will occur. Does the plan provide for household pet registration? Does the plan provide for installation and reading of microchips at the animal shelter? Does the plan establish provisions for the sheltering of unclaimed animals that may be remaining at the animal shelter after the disaster is over? Does the plan provide for the segregation or seizure of any pets coming into the shelter showing signs of long-term abuse? Does the plan provide for technical consultation or supervision by a veterinarian or by veterinary technicians as official responders? Does your plan provide for the case when non-eligible animals are brought into the shelter? What if a citizen who is not evacuated brings their animals to you to be boarded or cared for? Are you willing and able to provide free boarding to someone who is not actually impacted by the disaster? If not, what will your plan be to handle those kinds of requests? In terms of actual animal care, once the animal is checked into your animal shelter, there are, as you might expect, a lot of direct animal care questions to consider. These can be addressed in your plan or annex, but you may want to separate them out into a separate plan that is specific to your emergency animal shelter plan. If you do this, you will not only have an animal disaster plan and annex, but also a separate animal sheltering plan. And this is not only okay, but is considered a best practice. So in terms of animal care, does your animal care plan provide for the housing of a variety of household pet species? In other words, do you have a lot of differently sized crates and cages, the ability to manage temperature control, and appropriate lighting? Does the plan provide for the separation of household pets based on appropriate criteria and requirements? Different species need to be separated. Pregnant or new mothers should have a separate quiet location. Aggressive animals should be isolated from other animals, and so on. Does the plan provide for the consultation of a veterinarian or animal care expert with household pet sheltering experience regarding the original facility setup and ongoing maintenance? Does the plan provide for the setup and maintenance of household pet confinement areas, that is, crates, cages, pens, for safety, cleanliness, and control of noise level? Does the plan recommend the setup of a household pet first aid area inside of each shelter? Does the plan provide for the control of fleas, ticks, and other pests at each household pet shelter. Does the plan provide criteria for designing and safely segregating aggressive animals? Does the plan provide for the segregation or quarantine of household pets to prevent transmission of any diseases that may occur? Does the plan recommend the relocation of a household pet to an alternate facility, for instance, a veterinary clinic or an animal control shelter, if it's found to be ill, has an injury, or proves to be aggressive? Does the plan recommend providing controlled areas, well, either indoors or outdoors, for exercising dogs? Does the plan provide for household pet waste and dead animal disposal? Does the plan provide for the reunion of rescued animals with their owners? Does the plan include mechanisms or processes to address the long-term care, permanent relocation, or disposal of unclaimed household pets? Your animal disaster plan or annex should also address public outreach and information. Here are some areas of public outreach and information that you may want to address. Does the plan provide mechanisms for continually updating public statements on shelter capacity and availability? Does the plan provide for a public education program? Does the plan provide for the coordination of household pet evacuation and sheltering information along with the jurisdiction's public information officer or joint information center? Does the plan provide for communication of public information regarding shelter in place? In other words, rather than bringing an animal into the shelter, does the owner have the ability to shelter at their home with their animal? And what kind of information do they need to do that? Let's recap. There are a lot of things to think about in terms of preparedness, evacuation, support, shelter operations, registration, animal intake, animal care, public information and outreach for your new or updated animal disaster plan. Few newly formed animal disaster plans will answer all of the questions asked in this module. Choose those that you can start to work on and use the rest as your guide to future plan updates and enhancements. Particularly with the area of animal care, you may want to create a separate, detailed animal sheltering plan rather than put all of that specific detail into your animal disaster plan or annex. Remember, it's better to have a simple, implementable plan than it is to have an elaborate plan that cannot be put into use during an actual emergency or disaster.